We're profitable for 7 years until we took venture capital. I had to throw out my job description every year and actually take up a new job description that was usually pushing me out of my comfort zone, out of things I liked doing, like development and design, and into something that I was completely uncomfortable or even bad at doing. So I guess the lesson is, like, if you're building a product, like who are the adjacent people in the ecosystem that could be selling what you're doing alongside with what they're doing? An interesting part of that early story is, I had no money. I mean, I was on unemployment for 2 years. All I wanted out of this whole thing was to win an Apple Design Award from Steve Jobs. Literally my goal.
Did you get that?
No.
You got the other part, right?
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I called it the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is Product Market Fit.
Do you think the Product Market Fit show has product market fit? Because if you do, then there's something you just have to do. You have to take out your phone. You have to leave the show 5 stars. It lets us reach more founders and it lets us get better guests. Thank you.
Dax, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
Dude, it's great to have you here. And I was looking, so you started in 2005, which means you must have your 20-year anniversaries coming up when?
We just celebrated in March 18th was the date of incorporation, and the company threw me a surprise party. There was I thought it was booked for meetings up until 7 p.m. and there was just a big cocktail party and a cake.
That's awesome.
And a varsity jacket with 20.
I saw that. Yes, it was a nice jacket. It was a nice jacket. And then you came on the show to talk about it all. So that's perfect. Perfect cap to your 20-year anniversary. Cool, man. Well, look, I mean, you're one of the most iconic companies to come out of I can't even call you a tech startup, but kind of one of the most iconic tech startups, I would say, coming out of Canada. You did, if I got it right, about $1 billion in trailing 12-month revenue, which is just insane. But you're also, I think, an example of, it takes a long time. Like these, 0 to 100 million ARR in a year or 2 years or whatever's happening these days is not the norm. I think the norm is a lot more like your story started in 2005 and, you're hitting those numbers now in 2025, right? 20 years later. So we'll walk through all that. I mean, mainly the first part of the journey, because biased me thinks it's the most interesting part. And second, because that's what the show's about. But maybe let's start there. Like, take us back to 2005. Like, who were you at that time? What was going on in the world? Just kind of set the context for us.
Yeah, 2005, 2 years before the iPhone comes out. So I guess we were on flip phones. Yeah, I had moved to Montreal. I mean, I'm native of Vancouver. I had moved to Montreal like maybe 4 years before that. I was 28. I'd been building software on the Mac since I was 13. I worked for a startup. So my very first job was interning for like a Mac software development company for a couple of years. And so I actually got the startup bug before I even knew what a startup was. I was just working for this company that was my dad's my dad's boss's son's new company.
And they were building what? Like some software for Macs or?
Yeah, they were building some early networking tools on the Mac. And then all through my teens and 20s, I was building Mac software, and a lot of it ended up being for the Mac dealership community because I was working in Mac stores. I was kind of like a little Mac fanatic as a teen. These are the tough years for Apple, right? Like the years before Steve came back, when it was basically almost going to be bankrupted, and so I was just like a diehard. Now they don't need my prayers today,
yeah,
but they did back then. So that was me. That was my whole personality was that. I was doing tech support for these dealerships, but also building software for them. So I kind of got a lot of user empathy. They would send me to the worst customers, those customers that needed to be taught how to do their email over and over and over again, like just like people. But I really got empathy for the user by doing that, and it helped me build better and better software. Because at the end of the day, I was never really an engineer, and that's why I dropped out of computer science after year one. I was really more of a UI designer, and then for the software I was building, it was all business software, right? And in the case of the Mac dealerships, it was different parts of the retail operations. So built a service department module, built a tool to calculate sales commissions, just lots of different pieces. And then my last job before I built Lightspeed was a system that ran 4 stores. So it was almost, kind of what Lightspeed does, but not quite. So yeah, that was sort of the lead up to it. That business went out of business because of internal issues between the founders, and that's sort of left me without a job. But there was a lot of folks that had seen the things that I was building and said, "Can you build me something? Can you build me something custom? Can you build me something custom?" And I was like, Apple was just really taking off at that point in 2005, right? It was just Steve was back, iMac was out, iPod was out. It was just really on the. It was a couple of years before the iPhone and the iMac and the iPhone and the iPad, and everybody wanted to run their business on the Mac if they could, like especially the retail stores in Soho and New York, right? And so instead of building custom systems over and over again, I was like, there's a platform here, right?
But this was already out of Mac dealerships. So other people were seeing the software you're building for these dealerships, and they're asking you to build custom software for them.
A lot of Mac dealerships around the world gained a reputation of being able to like build stuff for them, and they all wanted the system. And so they ended up being, after I built Lightspeed, they ended up being our first customers. And then really the first 200 or 300 customers were international Mac dealers. So I'd go to their organization or their kind of conferences and so we just sold to them, and they were like not small businesses. Some of them were multi-location. All of them have the complexity that a typical Lightspeed retail customer has, like tens or hundreds of thousands of SKUs, inventory with serial numbers being shipped to different locations where the customer needed it, floor sales, corporate sales, repair shop, parts, a lot complicated purchasing in multiple currencies because they would get supply from all over the world. So it was really a really great place to start. They're the reason why we did take funding for the first 7 years. These initial customers, the dealerships, basically, instead of each of them building their own FileMaker or Microsoft Access database, which is what they were all doing individually, these businesses are spending tons of time building out systems. They're like, okay, let's all buy licenses from this guy, and like, let's give him all of our input, and then, we can all benefit from it. And so that was, I think, a big part of the story. And then when they were really good at the software, after 1 or 2 years, they became our international distribution network. They became our resellers, and they started to sell Lightspeed in their neighborhoods, and that's when the companies like super took off.
So let's walk through those first phases. Like first, you're out of a job, and is your next move? Like you just start kind of getting, billing for kind of custom software development, or do you kind of say, no, this needs to be a product company? You open up Lightspeed right away, incorporate, and start building out a product. Like, how do you think about those first initial steps?
Yeah, so there was one customer, great small Apple dealership, but very kind of forward looking. Mike Patat at Evolution Concepts here in Montreal, and he said, "Build me something, please. I really want something that's going to be," because he had big expansion plans and he wanted something great. And so I said, you know what, I'll do that for you, but I'm not going to do a custom system. I'm going to build you something that's going to be a product on its own, and let's get some other customers. You'll be a customer, but let's you and me get some other customers, and eventually this is something that you can sell as a product. And so we had his store, which was a Mac dealership I was very familiar with, kind of what their needs were. But we also had a spa that had a lot of product and so on and services, and that was like some friends that were opening a spa out in Vancouver. And then we had a furniture store that was opening up in Montreal. That was one of his customers. And they had a ton of inventory, so a lot of the same workflows. They had repair, and they also had an interior design component. So that's not really in the wheelhouse of Lightspeed today, but we built a whole jobs and timesheets piece to the product, and so we tried to accommodate these three kind of profiles, plus all the Mac dealerships that were joining the platform. So we had these three initial reference customers, and I was the core developer. I was, for the first 2 years, coding till 4 a.m. Every day. Pretty social person, but you didn't see me anywhere for 2 full years. No co-founders. There was a couple of initial people that I hired on. I hired a lot of friends that had just graduated or that were interested. And I had one other developer that joined me, Francois. So he's like the other 20-year employee. He just retired a year or two ago. But but yeah, I was mainly the primary developer for that period. And so what I would, this was pre-cloud, right? On-premise software. So I would be coding and then going to the stores, watching them use it, watching the staff operate it. And that's how Lightspeed, the original version of Lightspeed, became this ultra crafted product that people just, when we discontinued it, people did not want to get off of it. It's just like, there's things that original product does. I wish the current, like obviously now it's cloud, it's web browser based. It's like, but there's something about beautifully crafted Mac software that it's hard to compete with, right? And I'll be totally 100% honest with you. And people laugh when I tell them this, but my only goal was not to build a company with a public company that's at $1 billion. I have no finance background. I had not even a clue what that even meant. All I wanted out of this whole thing was to win an Apple Design Award from Steve Jobs. Literally my goal.
Did you get that?
No.
You got the other part, right?
Well, then he passed away, right? So they were like, hey, this is never happening. That was the entire goal, right? So, but the reality was, it was the UI for that product was incredible. We just didn't use Apple's official tools that they were really promoting with the design awards. So we got a little bit shafted there.
But you were obsessed with product and design then. Walk me through. I've got kind of maybe a multi-part question, but like one is just to understand for me, like what are the main use cases that you are solving for these three very different customers so that it's still a product and not custom? And then related to that is kind of this thinking around, product is a funny thing. Like everybody wants to build a great product, but then there's all this stuff around MVP, around don't take it too far. You probably took it very far if that was your main goal. Just any thoughts you have around that or what you ended up doing that obviously, in your case worked.
We were really trying to make the complex of managing inventory and managing all the aspects of a retail business. We're trying to make that simple, right? So the reason why people wanted to use iMacs in their store, yes, it was more beautiful than some black plastic PC. But what it meant for them was like, okay, I'm used to being able to understand what I'm seeing on an iMac, right? Like, so what the original version of Lightspeed was almost set up like iTunes, now called Apple Music. Now it makes no sense anymore. But back in the day, like iTunes had like playlists on the side and like content on the other side. And we built, the original interface was you could see your business like you were looking at playlists, different aspects of the business. And so when people saw the interface, they're like, okay, I already understand what this means. I understand that I can see my business this way. So it almost sold itself, right? People, I get it, right? I get it. And purchasing and receiving inventory and all the supplier invoices and all that's super complex. All of it's super complex. So the workflows, and that's why I had to watch people do it. I had to watch people receive stock. I had to watch people place purchase orders. I had to watch people do the invoicing or invoice part now, part later with stuff that had come in or hadn't come in. And later when we added e-commerce, like how they're doing that workflow, how they were doing transfers from stores. So all that, which is complex, they felt like, I can figure this out. It looks like iTunes,
What's give me maybe before and after of that? Like you remember going in there and seeing some workflow. Here's how they're doing it now. And then now with Lightspeed, here's how they get to do it. And it's so much easier, so much simpler.
Well, I mean, for the spa, what was nice is Evolution Concept, the Mac dealer, they really told me their needs. I mean, they had, like every Mac dealer, they had some FileMaker thing that was like hobbled together. So I understood the concept of that because I dealt with it at other Mac dealerships. So I knew what they needed. Now, the spa and the furniture store, I spent more time there because I'd never seen what they need specifically or what their day-to-day life is. But what I learned is like people are going to manage inventory and they're going to sell things in roughly the same way. And actually, Lightspeed wasn't started as a point of sale system. It was started as a quoting and invoicing system because that's really what Evolution Concept wanted. So we started there and it evolved over time into being adding the front counter point of sale and all the other pieces. And concurrent with all of this, which is an interesting part of that early story, is, I had no money. I mean, I was on unemployment for 2 years.
No way.
Yeah. And like when you start a business in Quebec and you just got laid off, they'll extend your unemployment, for up to 2 years. but you have to show that there is a real business. Like you have to have customers, you have to like, but you're for a guy that was like, you're just fueled on Tim Hortons French vanilla coffees and coding till 4 a.m. I didn't have a lot of expenses,
Dude, I remember, by the way, just on a tangent, like it's so funny. I feel like in those early days, first of all, obviously you're younger, but also, I don't know, you just kind of align yourself with the realities of your business. And, for us, like I remember Ligh and I, when we started Gym Track, like, it was like this place called Di Rienzo sold Italian subs. And we found out they were $5 cash, no tax. We were like, dude, we're eating here every day. You know what I mean? And it wasn't painful either. It was like, just amazing to get such a great deal because you're just mining every dollar like that. It's just such a different lifestyle.
No, 100%. Like you find something, it works, you're eating it every day. You might maybe multiple meals. So like in this time, you can just imagine, like, I didn't even think about money. I was having so much fun building the software, and like the energy level was so high. And obviously there's money coming in, like there was already customers, right?
They're paying, right? All these customers, these three are paying. Okay.
Never gave any free, never any beta. Like that was like another thing, but I'm getting to the there's an interesting pricing lesson here in a second. Yeah. So you're on these grants. So you're on this like subsistence kind of thing for you. Like it'll pay kind of your basic expenses without living any fancy life. But like for the business itself, there was grants, right? So we applied to a grant for $6,000 and a grant for $8,000. They were like small business grants that you get here in the city of Montreal. And to do that, they required you to write a business plan. And I was like, I'm like a bit of a designer. I'm a bit of a, just, this is not my background. This is like, sounds like BS. I'm going to be made to do this. I'm never going to look at this thing again, but I got to do it. Right. So wrote this business plan with their template. So it was like an 8 to 10 pager where I had to actually, so there's 2 parts. So there's the essay and there was like the spreadsheet. The essay, what that made me do, refine what we're actually going to do and build, because there's so many ideas and so much potential. And like, there's obviously with our early customers, and I already had them at this point, and I already had an idea what we were doing, but there's so many directions you can take a company. But what writing that essay made me do was really, really create focus, right? To really define what we were doing and what we weren't doing. Because what didn't go into the document was became not a part of the plan. What the spreadsheet made me do is it made me think about, okay, what is this going to look like over 3 years? Because I need salespeople, I need support people, I need admin, I need to think about marketing, and if what kind of revenue am I going for? Now I had some early indication of what people were willing to, what it was worth to them. That's the other important thing of product market fit is like, what is this worth to people? And that leads me to probably the most important part of this whole exercise was pricing. In those early days of Lightspeed, there was a couple of companies I really admired. Like there was not a lot of business software on the Mac, right? Like we were really creating a new category. There's an amazing CRM package that was for like more like an entrepreneur that was like on the road and they were like keeping their contacts and building their business. And we were different, right? Like that was a multi-user system, and so were we, but we were kind of like multi-user and like running the whole operation. So, they were charging $140. Okay, let's try to charge $170, per user. And I showed this to my dad's business partner, one of my dad's colleagues, that was interested in becoming a reseller of ours, and he was like, ×4. I was like, ×4. I'm like, where did you get that from? And he's like, first of all, if you try to buy a PC black plastic system out there, people are paying a ton of money. You're running the whole business. Like don't look at what your competitor or what you think is like somebody in your category is charging. If you've got a ×4, And he was thinking maybe it's a bit selfishly for him because he was going to get...
He's got to get margin. Yeah. Which is a lesson in itself, because if you don't have that, then you don't have resellers, which is a whole other story.
And that's like the second part of the story. That ×4, when I flowed that through a 3-year spreadsheet and showed, and it showed the ability for the company to actually fund more developers, more salespeople, we would not be here today if we didn't ×4. There's just no way. That allowed us to build the software that ended up being adopted by all of those users on a large level. And if we had kept the software cheap and had the same number of, it just nothing would have added up. Like we would not have been able to expand and scale the company. So that was a huge, huge important lesson But of course, you've got to have that product market fit where people need the solution. Like they can't run their business. They have to have it. And then that's where you have the ability to do times 4, because they're thinking, okay, I'm going to pay this, but I know a lot of other people are paying this too. I'm thinking of, like, as one of the Mac dealers at the time, they were taking a bet on my 1-year-old company. They're like, okay, if everybody's paying $5,000 for this, and we're also paying an annual maintenance fee, then this person has real money to build something real for my needs, And so it also gives them comfort that, okay, if I'm paying the guy only $170 or a couple, or a few $100 per user, there's a bit more risk for me. This guy's not gonna be able to pull it off, or he's not gonna be able to build out a team. So it taught me a lot about the value, right? The value that you deliver with your software. And then ultimately when they became, after 7 years of bootstrapping, because that was our journey, a 7-year of bootstrapping, we got to 10 million of annual revenue, which was all software. All of that was driven by 400 resellers around the world, making 25% on times 4 pricing. And so that's how the whole business model was transformed, by writing that BS business plan I didn't think was valuable. And then the discussion about pricing that changed everything.
There's a lot to pull on there, but just on the pricing piece, it's, when you describe it that way, you kind of realize just how much can flow from pricing, because you would think if your goal is, I want every single retailer to use this product, right? You would say, well, the cheaper the better, because it just opens more doors. But the challenge is, the way you're describing it at least, is like the pricing determines the go-to-market as well, right? And so if you're going to charge, 2,000 ACVs versus 10,000 ACVs, the partnerships get a lot harder because there's not enough meat for the partners, so you can't do that. The sales piece is more challenging because you got to put sales reps on it. They're closing 2K ACVs, so all of a sudden you kind of, on the one hand, you're cheaper. You would assume basic economics means you can get more demand. The problem is you can't go get that demand because you don't have enough kind of juice there to go get it.
100%, right? Like we had inside salespeople, we had partners, and the resellers on a $5,000 sale that would have been, let's say, 5 user, or maybe a bit more. They're making 25% off the 5,000, but they're also selling. At the time it was all on premise. They're selling servers, they're selling computers, they're selling networking, they're selling training. We're selling $5,000 of software, but they're selling a $25,000 installation. So if you think about all the Mac dealers at the time, this is around the time frame where Apple's opening its own stores and they're competing with their own dealers, right? So a lot of these dealers went all in on Lightspeed. Their go-to-market was funded by the fact that they could get real margin on the software, and then really good margin on all of the pieces that went connected to it. So you built like a really powerful network, and we did 2 certification camps every year, so that for people to get more advanced vet badges and certifications with us. About 300 or 400 people would come to one in Montreal and one in the US, and that also was a part of that early 7 years of bootstrapping, where we did that in year 1. We started in 2005. We did our first camp in 2006.
Oh, wow.
40 people come from like places like Saudi Arabia and Ireland and Australia. And they wanted to be the first people trained up on how to sell this. And then it just built like that from there. Like we didn't really have a real inside sales force. There's enough in it for these people, enough margin, enough they could leverage their own existing expertise. So I guess the lesson is, like, if you're building a product, like who are the adjacent people in the ecosystem that could be selling what you're doing alongside with what they're doing, right? These guys were used to selling software, but they were really good at selling hardware. They're good at installing it, good at training on it. And if they could become the expert on this in their area, they could build a real business around it.
Well, obviously you got partnerships like very right, but I think most founders, like, it's always alluring, right? Because you're like, oh, if I could just find somebody else to sell my thing, then, it'll just take off. Like, they've got all these reps, and I see it fail more than succeed. I guess one question for you is, like, when you think about each of these independent, and many times the failure point, I should say, is little company partners with massive company, expect, 1,000 salespeople are going to sell a product. Nobody, nothing happens. How important were you for each, like, from one reseller's perspective, how much business were they really doing? Was this 5%, 10%, 20% of their business that they were able to get? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you have an idea of that, but how important were you for them?
So a lot of them had the perspective. I'm not sure. I think it varies, but a lot of them set up a whole department to do this.
Wow.
Yeah. Like, remember that, like I said, Apple was starting to open its own stores. This was across the street from these folks. And they had to come up with other ways that were going to be differentiated from the Apple Store experience. Like, one way they could differentiate. So think about your products as like, okay, how can it be a differentiator for somebody that's selling into whatever industry, that you're a secret sauce that allows them to do something that nobody else can do, that they can get a certification that nobody else has, and it gives them an edge in their sales toolkit, right? So that's what Lightspeed gave these folks. Now, things got more complicated later. Like when we moved into the cloud and there was less hardware, and there was less installation, in the case of retail, almost no installation, the partner model had to change. But for 7 years, we didn't take investment because of how powerful that the economics of that relationship were for those resellers and for us.
And so to be clear, like for the reseller, it was kind of like, hey, you could go across the street, buy Apple stuff there. But if you come here, then I can sell you Lightspeed. I can install it for you and you can run your business on it versus just have like, an iMac or whatever they're going to sell you.
Yeah, like we can sell you the iMac, but we can sell you the entire thing, a huge solution. And it's not just you're getting a box, you're getting an implementation and an expert, somebody that's in your corner.
The other thing I want to touch on is the business plan piece that you mentioned. Like it's business plans are really, they're not cool. Like they're not cool at all. I mean, they're kind of getting a little cooler now because people got this Notion thing and they're starting to do memos, which started to come close to a business plan. I wonder, I'm sure you meet a lot of founders. Many people have probably pitched their startups to you or asked for advice. Like when or why does a business plan sometimes make sense? Because most of the time, I think people are just doing these 10 slides and that's it.
But that is not a business plan. It's not a business plan. A 10 slide deck. Show me a business plan. Show me how this looks over. What are your projections in 3 years? What are you committing to? The other thing I didn't mention about the business plan, we missed the year 1 number. The year 2 number we hit on the head, and the year 3 number we exceeded. And I was like, but we actually put thought into what the numbers meant.
What were those numbers? Do you remember?
I think the first year was like 80, 90K. The second year was 400K, which we actually hit. And the third year was maybe 900 and we exceeded. Right. So they ended up meaning something. And so the problem with a 10-page deck is you could go in and change your whole strategy by changing 2 slides. Like that's not focusing. It's and I feel like that's so easy to just throw a couple of ideas on and not have to really go through the clarifying experience of writing that essay, and having like tables in the essay were tables for the pricing, tables for, who are our distribution partners, what is the stuff, like all of it was in there. I'm happy to share it with anybody who wants it.
Yeah, that'd be cool actually.
I'll send it out. But to this day, I can like derive Lightspeed's mission statement from that business plan.
Maybe let me try this with you, see what you think. Like, is there maybe a right time to write a business plan? What I mean by that is, if I have an idea today, and I kind of say, I'm going to write 20 pages on it. The downside is I'm going to also convince myself that, oh man, this like is really great because it's easy to make a great idea sound good on paper. When you've got enough reality behind it, like you did, you actually understood your customers, all these things. Is that the right time?
I think so. So yeah, you're right. We had a couple of customers. It was early in the journey, but we had enough to know what do people value about the software. We had a little, we had early product market fit. And so maybe that's the answer is like, once you have established that you have with your MVP with your MVP or your early beta, you have early indications that people are going to pay for this and will convert off of, a trial and what they're willing to pay. Then you have, I think, the basis for building a plan around it. Otherwise it is theoretical, right? Because you're building numbers based on, okay, well, have I proven that people are going to pay for it?
So maybe let's go deeper now. So that's also super helpful. Let's go deeper. We have the high level numbers, right? Like whatever, 100K, 400K, $1 million, let's call it, round numbers. How long do you build you have those 3 first customers, right? Like how long do you just build with those 3 customers before you go adding more? How do you think about getting the product to a certain stage before really pushing it? Like how do you kind of bridge that gap?
I'm really worried because listen, like you've been listening for like what, 10, 20, 30 minutes now. Clearly you like it. And the thing is, the next episode is way better and you're going to miss it. You're going to miss it because you're not following the show. So take your phone out and hit that follow button.
There was certainly Mac dealers that wanted it like right away. But they were the ones that maybe had less scale. towards the end of year one, where we had a lot more in the 1.0 beta, and we were starting to get to 1.1 and so on, where it had more of the advanced features, we were able to onboard. Some people prepaid. And they were like, "Hey, I want to guarantee that you're going to be building stuff that we're going to need, but we're not installing it now." Like installing it across our 3 stores in Chicago. That was like an early customer that bet on us. They bought it, but they didn't install it until they felt like the betas were ready and what they were hearing in the community that it was ready, right? So yeah, I think that we did bring on customers as much as we could from that dealership community, because there was a couple of meetings per year that they had that we were pitching and we were showing them the progress. And as we're adding service repair modules and different pieces, people would jump on. And there were things that people were waiting for.
How'd you split your time between like that sales and marketing piece and the product, design piece in those early years?
It's an interesting evolution in those early years, right? Because I was a developer, and of course I had a little bit of social interaction with the people that I did tech support with and so on, but I was an introvert. And for the first 2 years where I was coding, I would, I rented I rented the second floor of the apartment where I was on the third floor, right? It's like these walk-ups in Montreal. I'd just take the back stairs down. So I'd be coding till 4, then walk the back stairs, and I would join the team at 11. And they were like, there were salespeople, there were support people, there was admin people. We grew really, really quickly. We moved offices every year. At some point, I had to give them leadership, like they were like, why are we doing this? Like, what's the vision? So I had to kind of step up and sort of become a leader for them. And as an introvert, that was a big step. And then from there, I started to be able to be more comfortable about being the spokesman. So I would do these town halls and great presentations. That's one thing I knew how to do, was design something beautiful, get people inspired. And that's what Lightspeed was sold on, was like great design and great UI. So I would do those town halls. And then I got more comfortable with standing in front of these dealership organizations and pitching it and traveling and speaking in public. But like, founders should know, like, none of that stuff necessarily comes naturally to everybody, right? And it's something you do with practice. Like, you could actually be good at speaking in one format, like radio or TV, and not be good at doing a speech in front of 500 live people. And so those are all things that I had to I had to throw out my business. I had to throw out my job description every year, and actually take up a new job description that was usually pushing me out of my comfort zone, out of things I liked doing, like development and design, and into something that I was completely uncomfortable or even bad at doing, and I've had to do that every year of Lightspeed. Like, I have no finance background. I had to take a company public. I had to get really immersed in it and leave the things that I loved. I had to bring on other people that were good designers and developers in the early days. But that was where I got my confidence, was building and shipping and seeing the reaction of people and iterating, and that's what felt like a real job to me. So when I had to transition to the leader, and then by 2010 was completely out of development, I was like, I don't feel very useful, like, this is not a real job. Like, managing people, like, that's not a real job to me. It's like not as satisfying as compiling something and giving it to somebody and seeing it come to life. It's just, but I saw in those early days a lot of other companies that the founder was still coding after a very long period of time, and they didn't scale. Like, it was the founder was still debugging things in the middle of the night, instead of going out to meet the dealers or the resellers or whoever it was. Or going to a conference, or going to sell a big client. So that evolution was super important. And I think it's like it's dangerous when you just stay. It's easy to say, okay, if this is what I'm good at, we're gonna hire. Yes, you have to hire people that complete the picture, right? Like, you got to hire the head of sales, you got to hire, but you've also got to understand what does the business need from you as the leader every year, and you got to be honest with yourself that might not always overlap with what you think you're good at or what you enjoy.
And going back to those first 3 years, just zooming in on it, like, I mean, if you're not taking in any outside money, then am I right to assume you were profitable? And if so, like, your employee count must have been, like, you had 100K in the first year. You had what, two employees, 3 people? Like, is that about right?
Like, right off the bat, we had 4. Yeah, we got to 15, 20 people pretty quickly. I mean, by the time we were at 70, by the time we were done bootstrapping and got our Series A from Excel, I would say we're at about 45, 50 people. Early days, I think we got to 15 to 20 people really quickly. But remember, we had real revenue, right? And we were profitable. We were profitable. We were profitable for 7 years until we took venture capital.
What are your thoughts on that?
And then we've only been profitable like now for the last 4 quarters on an EBITDA, on an adjusted EBITDA basis, but free cash flow, like we're still getting back there. And that's why this period where I'm back at the company and we're in a profitable growth phase feels like the bootstrapping days, because we're balancing profit and growth. And yeah, it's a very honest way to run a business, right? You're not trying to supercharge the company for growth, but not build quality, right?
Is that, by the way, this is kind of a little bit off topic, but it's interesting nonetheless. When did you leave and when did you come back?
So after 17 years of being CEO, my president took on the CEO title in 2022, and I just returned in 2024. I was 2 years as the exec chair, and I did a bunch of documental work and film work and came back.
Is one of the main goals to go to cash flow positive?
Yep.
How much did you think about fundraising then wasn't what fundraising is now. Like today you have an idea, you raise like $3 million or whatever. It wasn't really the case back then, especially in Canada. But like, how much did you think in that early part of the 7 years, like about, should you raise a seed? Should you not? Like, how did you walk through that thinking?
I mean, honestly, I'm probably an edge case here. I just didn't think about it at all because I have no finance background, and we were selling software, making money, and actually I was buying real estate for the other than the first couple of buildings where they were rentals. I was buying real estate with our profits and just building it like a real. I felt like if anything happened with a software business, I wanted some assets for the company, So I would buy the company, buy these buildings and rent it to Lightspeed, and ended up having some great real estate at the end of it. But like, I didn't even think about that until later, when companies, as we went to like the bigger trade shows, when Apple stopped doing the Macworld trade show and we started going to the retail trade show, we started to meet more VCs, and they were like, okay, there's Square that's coming up, but they're a bit more on the mass market. Then there's like Shopkeep, which we eventually later acquired. And we were seeing people that were sort of in our space get big investment, and we felt like, okay, then that's not going to be great for us if we don't have the same kind of firepower. We don't have the same kind of backers, connections to Silicon Valley, being out in Montreal, and so that happened very, very quickly with Excel. Within 2 weeks, we had a term sheet. After meeting them at NRF. Well, after 2 weeks, we met the person again in Montreal, and then 2 weeks after that, we had a term sheet. So it moved quickly, but I hadn't really thought about it that much.
This is maybe an impossible thought experiment, but I'm still curious in asking, like, what do you think would have been different if you had, like, in today's environment? Let's put it that way. In today's environment, if you had the numbers you had, certainly after 2 or 3 years, I mean, almost everybody in your shoes would go out and raise venture. What do you think would have happened if you did? Do you think you would have grown faster? Do you think it actually would have maybe made things worse somehow? Like, again, it's a thought experiment, but curious on the hypothetical.
It's an interesting thought experiment for sure. I think there's a couple of things that. Well, first of all, the bootstrapping. I think the longer that you bootstrap, just my opinion, the more you solidify your identity as a company. And later, after we were public, we bought. And actually, when we were private too, as a VC-backed company, we bought 3 companies, and later we bought almost another 10. And that the ability for us to integrate companies from all over the world with different cultures and that I think was doable for Lightspeed because of the 7 years of bootstrapping and having a really strong core identity. And I think it made us a great company to be acquired by as well. And like, we had a lot of executives end up being in our top ranks from the acquired companies. So I think that allowed us to also build the product without having a lot of influence by VCs trying to chase a hot trend or pushing you to do this and that. It will allow us to execute on that famous business plan, without being too distracted. Listen, maybe in year 3, That was an interesting moment actually. Year 3, the business plan ran out, and so there was another 4 years between that and having a venture capital backer. Maybe that would have been a good point to bring in VC. What we did instead is there's a thing in Canada called BDC, Business Development Bank, and we've been talking to them about loans if we ever needed one, but we never ended up needing one. It was too high interest anyways. But they did offer like a consultant that would come in. The guy's name was Andrew Penny. He would come in once a month and he would kind of challenge us on all of our decisions. And that ended up being sort of a great bridge to the Series A, because there was a lot of ways we could have taken the early success. And that was sort of the bridge. But I think if I was to run your thought experiment, maybe that would have been a good moment for the VC like for Excel to come in, because they replaced Andrew Penny, and they were kind of the people challenging us and taking us to another level. In fact, in the early days of the Series A, we spent every Friday time, like an hour or more, talking about how to take the business to the next level. So having some kind of equivalent to that is important, I think, after that initial business plan.
But yeah, I can see both sides of it. Obviously, I'm a seed stage VC, so I think in many cases it makes sense. But I also can see how, especially in those early days, like being maniacally focused on just product market fit and making customers happy and not having any other stakeholders can kind of just, you know what I mean? You just zoom in on the thing that really matters.
And I think it probably depends on, if there's alignment with a VC. If let's say you do need to, well, that was another part of the business plan, right? The business plan tells you in what year you're going to need to have outside investment to do your plan, right? And I think because we were able to pay for a lot of the plan, and didn't have bigger ambitions to grow because it was growing fast, we didn't need to bring in external money. But somebody might write a business plan and it might say, okay, I do need external, like an early VC to come in. And if there's alignment that you need to stay close to the customer and you need to be able to build that product in that sort of bubble and have a somewhat a purity to that, then that could be a great path.
And how did the other question I have is on product? Like, how did your product evolve, especially over those 7 years from what it was at the beginning, kind of on-prem, run your business to whatever it was on year 7? Like, what did you do on product through that time?
So it was an on-prem product the entire time. It wasn't until like we brought in a VC that we actually transitioned to the cloud, and that was a huge part of the transformation that we did with Excel. That was hugely successful and allowed us to do everything we're doing now. But yeah, I think that first 7 years, obviously the product got deeper and richer, and we did a couple of transitions, like in terms of database and so on. But I think the biggest transition was getting me out of the code, and I think that unlocked a lot of the business. I mean, I had a crisis because I was like, okay, I'm not doing real work anymore. but that was like an important step, was to get me into a different. I was sort of the CEO/director of development because I still needed to be involved. But yeah, that was like a big part of the transition. It's like, okay, we're going to do Lightspeed 3.0 is a big moment for us. It was like moving to a lot of new tools, moving to an open source database instead of all these licenses we were paying for databases. And so we were moving to a whole new architecture. And I really had other developers lead that because it now was exceeding my skill set too. Like a lot of the stuff was being built in Python and so yeah, that was like a big transition of using the Lightspeed 3.0. I did the 1.0, I did the 2.0, but to get to 3, which was an architectural change, letting other people lead that, there's huge step changes for the end user in terms of performance, in terms of scalability. But little did they know the biggest part of the scaling was getting me out of the picture.
And then, looking back, these things are harder to see kind of forward looking, but a lot of easier kind of with the hindsight 2020. Like often we talk about, if you want to create a big business, you need to drive some kind of inflection point, some kind of tech change, like the Shopify being the other big Canadian success, kind of e-commerce, the wave of e-commerce was kind of what they ended up enabling and also riding. So you kind of make it and ride at the same time. When you think about Lightspeed, like what do you think that was the thing that opened up the space for you?
I think it would have been it would have been when we went into the cloud on retail. And that's where we start to be like, because we were so Mac ecosystem, and tied to the hardware. And there was a lot of room to grow with that. And also in the early days, we actually worked with Apple to bring all the handheld units that they had to do mobile POS. We actually had that for non-Apple retailers, right? So we were able to do a lot of cool things with the on-prem system. But it was being able to go into the cloud that was like a huge step change. Now we could have our software being run on any kind of platform, because at the time, like Apple's like pretty pervasive now. You see a ton of like almost a standard laptop to buy in some regards, but it wasn't.
Well, I guess that's the question. Like, so you have the second part, which is definitely the cloud SaaS being kind of the big wave that you end up riding. But could you argue that kind of the Mac adoption, because Mac kind of starts with the user and then they're like, oh, this is great, I'll bring it to my business. Like, but and then now you're there. You know what I mean? Like, was that a big part of what kind of drove you? Drove the business is sort of like a tailwind for the business.
Listen, in the bootstrap days, the fact that Apple was having a major resurgence and everybody, let's say, like you would walk down the street in Soho in New York, and everybody was using an iMac because it was hot and Lightspeed, right? So, and that was the way you could get an iMac into the store, right? So the Mac was a huge tailwind. Like Apple's success was a huge tailwind. Having the mobile devices and the iPads later, like Lightspeed Mobile, like all of that was a huge accelerant. But then there was also a fear that, okay, yes, Apple's on the rise. But back then it was nowhere near as pervasive as it is today, right? And so there was a fear that, okay, we're going to run out of the amount of people that are willing to buy Macs and willing to do a Mac server and so by going into the cloud, that was, we were getting tons of tailwind, but also it was like the next step change.
Perfect. Well, that's super helpful, Dax. I appreciate you sharing the story. We'll stop it there, and then let me just ask kind of the three questions that we always end on. The first one, actually, I'm quite curious on the answer. Like, when did you feel like Lightspeed had true product market fit?
I think, there was early indications with early customers that they were able to run their business and they were willing to pay the prices. But I think for me, the moment that I knew that the business had there was real excitement and potential was when 43 resellers came to Montreal from Saudi Arabia and Australia and Ireland and all over the US and all over Canada to get trained on a 1-year-old system so that they could resell it around all over the world. I was like, okay, there's something here that it is being recognized by people everywhere. I was like, that was a moment where, thank God we did this gathering and took a risk,
And then on the other side, was there ever a time, especially in those first 7 years, where you actually thought maybe this wasn't going to work? Like maybe you just fail?
I think there were many moments with early teams where I thought we had to change management a couple of times, where it felt absolutely like each one could completely fail and could be catastrophic, right? When you're growing that quickly early on, there's people that are coming up in the company that are way more qualified to scale to the next level because you hire them at a different moment, and there's people that are trying to defend their position, especially in an early startup that's having a lot of success, and you have to really carefully navigate those moments, and in the first 7 years was some pretty touchy situations that I felt like, the team could fall apart.
Actually, maybe let me take it just a quick tangent on that team. We didn't talk about that at all. Like, how do you think about this concept of like A players, B players, promoting from within, promoting from outside? Like, I'm curious if you have any, just high level thoughts on, that's one area that I see often, especially I would say amongst first time founders who haven't had they just never worked anywhere. So they don't really know what excellence necessarily is. And it's a struggle, to know if your team is really that great, or you think it's really good, but actually there's somebody 10x better out there you could have instead.
But I think it's really one thing to note that I've come to understand is that people might be the exact perfect right A player for a particular moment and a particular period, and then they may be able to do that somewhere at some other company, and they may not be an A player for when you're at the next level of scale, right? And so I think that is like, there's no A player for every every phase of the company. So I know that's like a fun thing to say, like A players hire, but it's like, and who is the right match for that particular moment of the company? And that's the challenge I was just alluding to, is like, I had to really be honest about who were the right people. And that's why I didn't give out any equity at the beginning. That's why there were no co-founders. It was like, I don't know if these early people are going to be the people that are going to be the right people for Lightspeed at year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so I don't want to lock into the wrong. We didn't give out equity until, and I know this is not always possible for founders, but we didn't give out equity until much later.
You owned 100% for the first few years? Incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
And so it did piss people off. But I was able to make moves on especially those early years, because you have to get time with those people. You have to let them perform. You have to, like, everything is new, right? With the business. And everybody's so enthusiastic at the beginning, and you give people big responsibility, but like a lot of people at the beginning end up being jack of all trades and really add value. And maybe there's ways that you can compensate them, but you may need specialized people very quickly. And so that's why don't go away. I think it's a mistake to go all in on equity too early. And I think you have to be cognizant that you might need to move the pieces around. And there may be people that move with the company through every stage. They might have to, but they might also have to find different positions in the company. It's not necessarily that your first developer is going to end up being the CTO either, So there's a lot of movement that happens in those early years. And I think you should set yourself up in terms of that equity, in terms of titles. People get crazy titles too quickly. Crazy titles. Everybody's a C-level, really?
I see that often, and that's honestly, it's not just giving the title, but it's also building in the expectation. You have somebody who's crushing, let's say, at a head of sales role, and they're like, I want to be a VP of sales or whatever, and you start telling them, oh yeah, that's the plan. You know what I mean? You start kind of promising these things. You set yourself up for inevitable failure, because the odds are not that high that they're the ones that are right for VP sales when you're at 10 million, and let alone C-level when you're at 50 or whatever it is.
There's just in the things that we just spoke about in terms of equity, in terms of titles, founders often way complicate their early years by doing too much there. And I don't know. I'm not sure where I got that advice early on. Maybe it was instinctive because I didn't know anything about business. But I think it was early lawyers. I think it was like early, like there was people saying, I've seen this before, and don't do that. And I think that founders feel a lot of pressure to have co-founders and to have all of this people helping, and then they have to get out of it later, and they have to like bring in somebody, but now there's no title for that person because your early
you have
friend.
To demote. Yeah, exactly. Like you're just stuck.
Then it's like this whole situation that you created.
So last question, I'm sure you've, over the years, like I said before, meet tons of founders, give tons of advice. Like, what do you find is maybe one of the most common pieces of advice that you give early stage startup founders?
So I spoke about it a little bit earlier, which is like, be willing to throw away that job description every year. Be honest with yourself. There's things that you love, the things that you think you're great at, that add the most value to the business, but be ready to do a real assessment of what does the business need from you this year? What is it? Who does it need you to be? And if you're not great at those things, like the best thing you can actually do for like the best performers in your company is show a role model of somebody stepping out of their comfort zone, learning everything that they need to, bringing in great supportive people, but actually being willing to actually challenge themselves in a new place because it's best for the company. And so it's like, it's throwing out that job description. And then when you do that, be a listener, like act with humility in your new place. You're not coming in having thrown away your job description. You're not coming in as the expert. When we were going public and I had to like, step into that person that knew a lot about finance, surrounded myself with accountants, and lawyers and absorbed and listened. Throw away the job description, but be humble and listen to people at all levels of the company.
Awesome. Well, Dax, it's been great to have you on the show, man. Really appreciate you sharing this with all of us.
Thank you.
So picture this. It's months from now, years from now, and one of your founder friends, a really close founder friends of yours, guess what? Their startup went bankrupt. And it turns out if you had just shared the product market fit show with them, they would have learned everything they needed to find product market fit and to create a huge success. But instead, their startup has completely failed. You have blood on your hands. Don't let that happen. You don't want to live like that. It is terrible. So do what you need to do. Tell them about the show. Send it to them. Put it on WhatsApp. Put it on Slack. Put it where you need to put it. Just make sure they know about it and they check it out.